It's November 14th, 2007 in Maastricht, the Netherlands. I'm speaking today with Michael Klare, Professor of Peace and World Security Studies at Hampshire College and author of many books, including Resource Wars and his latest Blood and Oil. He's participating in a Maastricht debate this evening entitled Energy, Politics, and Power. Professor Klare, welcome to Maastricht. You've written about geopolitics and what you've termed resource wars for years. In your opinion, what is the greatest current threat to EU energy security?
My greatest concern internationally
Okay.
is energy in general.
Okay.
For the United States and the other great powers, it's oil, because oil is the commodity of greatest demand. It's the most valuable commodity in international commerce, and it's also a commodity that's essential for military forces. And this is sometimes forgotten. We don't think of oil in military terms. We think of computers and explosives, but it's oil that drives the military forces of the world, especially the American military, which is highly mechanized. So it's a strategic commodity as well as an economic commodity. And that's why I focus now especially on oil.
What would you say is driving the increase in oil prices?
Well, that's a long discussion.
It is.
Because the price of oil is set by a combination of supply and demand and current international events. So all factor into this. You have rising world demand, and that's coming both from the mature industrial powers, the US, the EU countries, Japan on one side, and the rising industrial powers on the other, China and India. All of them want more oil at the same time. Meanwhile, the supply side is becoming more complicated. You have historically been able to increase supply to match demand. That's no longer the case. The producing countries are no longer able to keep up with demand, and that's causing a problem. And then you have the immediate political situation, which is very, very tenuous, very unstable. You have insurgency in Nigeria, which has shut down some oil. You have the war in Iraq. You have difficulties in Venezuela. And on the horizon, especially the threat of a war with Iran, which I think has contributed to the spike in prices. So you add all that up together, and you have $100 a barrel oil.
Okay. In November 2007, the executive director of the IEA, Nobuo Tanaka, I'm trying to pronounce that correctly, said that the next 10 years will be crucial for all countries. We need to act now to bring about a radical shift in investment in favor of cleaner, more efficient, and more secure energy technologies. How do you think that the EU's goals measure against Director Tanaka's position? Are they too low, too high?
Well, first of all, the problem is that the EU is just a small part of the world's energy equation, and it will be a diminishing share of the world's energy equation because the United States and China together are going to account for an ever-increasing share of the world's energy. Especially China alone will exceed the EU. If it doesn't already, it will soon. And then you have India following in China's footsteps. So whatever the EU does, and I'm thrilled to hear that the EU is taking these great steps, but if China, India, and the United States do not follow in the same path, we're going to have tremendous problems in the years ahead. So what the EU does is simply not enough. The problem is much bigger than that.
So the measures that the EU is taking, it needs to be something that's done on a global scale.
Exactly. The
Okay.
EU somehow has got to have a foreign policy that stretches to the United States on one hand, which the United States alone consumes 1/4 of the world's energy, far more than the EU does. And it also has to extend to China, India, and other rising consumers of energy. Unless the EU is able to extend its initiatives in those directions, it's not going to have the necessary impact on world energy behavior.
What chance do you see of the EU being able to convince its highly industrialized partners of this in anticipation of the end of the Kyoto Protocol?
You know, by itself, the EU does not have the power to do that.
Mm-hmm.
What the EU has to do is to work with like-minded forces in those countries, with business interests, with environmentalists in those other countries that share similar values and expectations that the EU has. There are people in the United States and even in China that are concerned about global warming, about energy problems, that also want to make these changes. So the EU has got to find allies in the United States and in the rising industrial powers and work with them to make pressure on the US government and the Chinese government. It won't work otherwise.
As a supplement to oil, how much potential do you see in biofuel development?
Well, if you're looking at biofuels, you have to ask what kind of technology is used to produce them. If we're talking about existing technology to produce biofuels, in the United States we basically use corn, and we use the ear of the corn. The corn kernel is the most valuable part of the corn plant, and there simply is no way in which you can produce enough fuel using this valuable part of the corn plant. Also, the technology used is very energy intensive. The net gain in energy is very little. So there's no practical way to achieve a decisive breakthrough using existing biofuel technology. I don't know how you produce it in the EU. Brazil, of course, uses sugarcane, which is a more efficient way of getting biofuel. You could use soy to get biodiesel, but these technologies are simply not going to bring us to the target. We have to develop new technology to convert biomass into fuels, second-generation biofuels like cellulosic ethanol, and at the rate we're going, the investment is not adequate to reach that objective.
What effect, especially in regards to the EU, they're discussing importing biofuel crop products to make various biofuels. What effect do you think this will have on the world's food supply?
Well, this is why I say that the existing technology for producing biofuels is simply not acceptable, because if you use current methods, so much land will have to be devoted to producing fuel that there will not be enough land available to produce food for the future world population. So unless we adopt alternative technologies for producing biofuels, we'll have mass starvation. So you have to make a massive investment in these second-generation biofuels if we're going to get to the fuel target without producing mass starvation.
By some estimates, the European Union will be importing 90% of its oil and 80% of its natural gas by 2030. And in the wake of the 2006 Russia-Ukraine gas standoff, there's a lot of talk about diversifying supply from different regions of the world. Many of these regions are politically unstable, and I'd like to go down a list of some of the places we're going to be expected to get these fossil fuels, and just if you could comment on the situation in each place. First of all, Russia.
Well, it's going to be very hard for the EU to diversify away from Russia, because Russia has such a powerful advantage in supplying natural gas to Europe. First of all, it